Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started just in a few seconds as the room fills. Thank you so much for joining us today for this panel on care work as mutual aid. Really excited to be here with you all. All right, let's begin. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mika, and I am one of the co-directors of the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center. And before we dive into the panel, just a few access notes. If you'd like more personalized captions from stream text, you can access them at dcc.page/captions, and we'll put that in the chat as well. If anyone is needing some extra help navigating this, you can use the Q&A function like a chat, or you can email access@disabilityculturalcenter.org, and we'll do our best to try to support you. Today's program is a Zoom webinar, so it's a bit like watching a TV show, but with optional participation. The DCC team will use the chat function to share access information and important links. And if you'd like to participate, you can use the emoji buttons and the Q&A space for questions and also to share comments. We also hope to have time for a couple of audience questions at the end. All right, on to the panel. We've been dreaming about this event, a mutual aid event, since we had our first care work panel over a year ago, and it's been on my mind ever since, and it feels even more timely now than it did then. And I can think of no better people to bring this conversation forward than Alan Pelaez Lopez, Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha, and Tiezst Taylor. So with that, I'll turn it right over to our moderator, Alan. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us live today. And for those of you in the archives, thank you for accessing this conversation. My name is Alan, and to begin the conversation with both Leah and Ty, I want to ask each of you if you can talk about, first introduce yourself and talk about how you define mutual aid or how you first encountered mutual aid. And Ty, would you like to go first?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I was first introduced to mutual aid in 2018. I was getting evicted. I had been spending less time teaching elementary school because I was becoming increasingly disabled. Although I lacked that language, I just knew my mental illness symptoms were getting worse and I didn't know what to do. I was dating someone, and he said, make a GoFundMe. I'll reach out to people. And at that time, I was able to reach a goal of $8,000 and secure new housing. And that really changed the way I thought about community, the way I thought about the world's capacity to be of aid to myself as a Black femme. And just the way it just changed how I saw what was possible, especially when it comes to emergency situations.
Thank you, Ty. Leah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi everybody. My name is Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a light-skinned, white and Sri Lankan non-binary femme in Philly. I'm wearing a t-shirt that says autism and there's a skeleton with the guns on it. Yep. Um, I feel like I first heard the term mutual aid in radical community spaces and political spaces in the 90s. And it was this idea of there doesn't have to be charity. It can be if you need something, you deserve to access it, and that people get to share what they have with each other. And there's not the same kind of power differences that I had been exposed to growing up with charities in my home community, right? Where you have to be deserving, you have to prove that you need it, like it's usually really shitty. People expect you to be grateful, things like that. And yeah, but what I also want to say is that I think that whether or not people use the term mutual aid, this is stuff that poor and working class communities have often done, and disabled and Black and brown communities. We just call it helping each other out. Um, and then jumping forward, I think that for a long time, like I didn't have a lot of care being given to me. It was very much like I need to take care of myself. And when I started connecting with other disabled Black and brown folks in the early 2010s, like there's a lot of places, but I'm particularly thinking about creating Collective Access, which was a space in Detroit, Michigan in 2010. That actually was a bunch of disabled Black and brown folks who were attending a conference, and we were all like, "We're gonna die. There's no access." And then we were like, "What if we actually, instead of like begging the shitty access coordinator to help us, who's an able-bodied white guy, like what if we actually just try and like help each other out?" And there's a lot I could say about that, but something that feels really important to lift up is the idea that's in there that like disabled people don't just have to be passive recipients of care from the state or from charities. Like we actually support each other. Like we're the people who actually keep each other alive, like the most. And we all have something that we can offer each other. And I'll just stop there.
Thank you. I'll briefly share how I first entered this. I think you pointed something out, Leah, that's really important about class, disability, being a non-white person in the US. I think the first time that I actually understood mutual aid was in 2011 when two members in my community in Massachusetts were on deportation procedures and nobody was helping their names are Dennis and Vinny. And it was up to us, other undocumented people, who came together and started a campaign to end their deportations. And it was a moment where I said, oh, the state's not going to help us. US citizens aren't willing to help us. Schools aren't willing to help us. And it was other undocumented people. I didn't understand it as mutual aid. I understood it as this is an emergency and I want my friends to be here with me. And then it wasn't until way later that I understood that that was mutual aid, that that was care when the state wouldn't care for us. And to tie in with, I mean, I think this is also tie what you kind of mentioned about being evicted and your own preservation, right? So with these definitions that we have on mutual aid, everybody experiences it differently, understands it differently, from sharing medication to donating to online fundraisers. I want to ask if you can each talk about one concrete form of mutual aid you've participated in or led, whether that was individual level, at a local level, or international level, and describe the process and any challenges you encountered. Leah, would you like to begin with this question?
Yeah, and I have two, but I'm gonna pick one. I want to start by talking about Crips for Eastons for Gaza, which is an initiative that Alice Wong, Jane Shi, and myself started. It's going to be 2 years ago on Christmas. And for people who don't know, it's an initiative we started to raise money so that people in Gaza can stay connected to internet and phone service because the Israeli offensive forces typically bomb all of the cell phone towers to cut people off. And it's basically like it's just fundraising. It is a lot of fundraising. I thought we were going to get like 5 grand. It really blew up. And just some things I want to say about that is that I think that sometimes I think people can think of like mutual aid as just being one thing, like, oh, you bring the soup to somebody. Um, and this is an example of something that's a little bit different. Like it is a fundraiser. So much mutual aid is fundraising. I think it's one of many examples of fundraising as international solidarity. Um, And something that feels really special about it is that we started it as three disabled Asians in North America who wanted to reach the people in Palestine and get folks money and connectivity. But in a way that we couldn't have expected, it blew up. So like I remember like a year ago, Jane was like, here's the map of where everybody donated. And it's like literally on almost every continent, like Africa, Latin America, South America, South Asia. Like it's really wild. And it's mostly people donating fairly small amounts of money, which add up. Um, so I guess just some like organizing lessons from that is that I think sometimes people can feel like mutual aid is something they want to do, but they can feel tapped out. They're like, I don't have the money. I'm not an organizer. I feel really weird about being asked to care or do like, or I've known people who are like, I actually like, I'm in this pocket. I don't have the physical ability to like do like to help my friend get on the toilet. Like I can't lift her because I have a disability with muscle weakness. And I think one of the things with Crips, and I think it's also true for a lot of mutual aids, is like there's so many ways that you can tap in. Like I feel like it is an example where people are like, yeah, I had $5 and I threw in and it helped. Or like Alice, Jane, and me started it, but we like at the high point we had like 180 volunteers who were just like in the Excel spreadsheet, like throwing a little benefit, like, I still don't know how this happened, but we had these gamers create an itch bundle, which I still don't really know what it is, but it's like a bundle of like games and RPGs. And they're like, we want to put it out there so people can buy it and the money will go towards Crips for eSIMs. There's just so many different ways to tap in. And I guess like I'll just summarize by saying like, you don't have to have every single skill that exists. You can have one skill and it can tap into mutual aid. Yeah. And that we fucked up so many times and we made a lot of mistakes and we learned from doing it, which is the other thing. I think like being accountable when you make mistakes is really important. But none of us knew anything really about eSIMs or any of this stuff when we started. We just were like, let's try it and see what happens and support each other in figuring it out.
Thank you. Ty, do you want to respond?
Sure. I've been so lucky since I believe it was 2020 to be a recipient of mutual aid from the Okra Project, which is a mutual aid collective that focuses on providing resources to Black trans individuals in New York City and beyond. And I remember the first time I reached out to them, I had my first psychotic episode, and I didn't know just what I was going to do. So becoming increasingly disabled in such a major way and trying to survive, not too long after my eviction and just seeking stability. And I spoke with someone from the organization and I was looking to move, and they were like, we're just going to help you out. Like, don't worry, we got you. We have a lot of funds, and they sent me 5K and offered me emotional support. And at the time, I think it was the most serious way that I had been helped before. And, being a Black trans person, I'm so used to extreme marginalization. I'm so used to being discounted. And it felt like I was actually being catered to. I'm like, is this privilege? Like, what is this? Like, they actually care about me. And they're not just emphasizing survival, they want me to thrive. They don't just want to help me find housing, they want me to find the best stable housing that I can find in my area. So the extensiveness of the care was a shock to me. But I just felt amazing to receive. And, the Okra Project has changed over time. It still emphasizes Black trans individuals, but they're no longer giving mutual aid in the form of direct cash. And so, something that has gotten pushback and has been concerning is a new system they use, which is Akimbo. It's a gift card service. And people complain that it's not accepted everywhere. For example, right now, it's amazing. They have $1,000 in rent support available, but it's through Akimbo. My landlord doesn't take Akimbo. Other people's landlords don't take that. People haven't even heard of it. So it's like, on the one hand, this is amazing mutual aid. $1,000 can make a lot of, difference in someone's life. On the other hand, this kind of feels like more of a neoliberal response to mutual aid to get this gift card that's not very well known. And so I think that these are concerns in mutual aid communities. As mutual aid collectives grow, how are these resources changing and shifting? And of course, right now in the United States, we're dealing with so much anti-trans rhetoric and hate. It's so dangerous, even more dangerous to be a trans person right now and to be increasingly targeted. And these resources are even more needed. How do we reconcile that with how this organization's changing, how other organizations have changed over time? These are concerns and conversations we need to keep having.
Thank you, Ty. I think that your last comment really brings in Leah's notion of accountability and how, people doing mutual aid need to be accountable, and also the idea of trial and error. I want to point out something that you said, which is that you felt, oh, am I privileged because somebody else or a collective wanted you to thrive? I think that for people who are disabled, whether they were born with disabilities or became disabled as children, teenagers, or adults, that's often one of the things that comes up. Oh, like, do I deserve this? Living in an ableist world that tells us we do not deserve this. Um, One of the things that I want to share in answering part of this question is I was getting a lot of medical exams about 6 years ago, and no one could find out what was going on. So I moved back home to Mexico. And when I was getting medical treatment, I was also organizing, and a community member in a very rural town approached me, letting me know that they were HIV positive and couldn't get medications, but they didn't want me to tell anybody in their community. So it became very difficult as an organizer to try to secure this. So I had to go and essentially rely on strangers in another community and say, this person needs medications. And we were very lucky that these strangers, like the person I was helping, identified as a cisgender woman, and they understood the risk of being HIV positive in a rural area and being a woman. And we're able to keep that secret. And to this day, I feel that although the mutual aid was met where they can pick up their medication, and we were able to advocate for a local clinic to carry it, this person is still the only one in that community who knows that they're HIV positive. So they're incredibly isolated. So when it comes to mutual aid, I think it's also what are longer term systems that we can create. Um, how can we not just show up the one time that it's needed, whether it be the grant, the gift card, the eSIM, but invite others to be there on the long run, um, especially those who are used to marginalization and who are being targeted right now. And with this, Ty, I think I would like you to maybe open the next question, which is about a writer. Uh, Vanessa Rochelle Lewis published a book about 2 years ago titled Reclaiming Ugly, where she describes that in social groups we are taught to uglify certain individuals and see them as underserving of love and care. Can you each speak about the relationship between mutual aid and care work and uglifying communities? This can address anything from anti-Blackness, classism, transphobia, fat phobia. How does uglification impact mutual aid and care?
I certainly feel that I cannot emphasize enough how systematically Black life is undervalued, if it's valued at all. And being Black and in the Black community as a mutual aid organizer, it's shocking how little attention we get. Someone that I've been involved in with community through Instagram, her name is on Instagram, Dark Skin Latoya, and she's raising mutual aid every day. And, in 2020, at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, there was so much support, and there was support through subscriptions. There were just so many more resources. And we've seen Black life be pushed to the margins again. Now it's less of a question for activists. And with that, we're seeing less funds for survival. I think, yeah, blackness is considered ugly, right? The closer you are to white supremacy, the more that you're valued in this society. And I think that one of the most radical things people can do in mutual aid communities is become consistent parts of Black communities and Black life. I know that mutual aid is sometimes, as disabled people or as low income people, it's something sometimes that we do once in a while. But thinking about how to budget for mutual aid and thinking about the space that we have and capacity as individuals to engage, particularly with the most marginalized communities that are around, is essential. I think that when you're creating your budget for the month, if you even have $15 to give for mutual aid, that can make a difference. And I think that what's really important is to really question, is this an issue of capacity? Is this an issue of finances? Is this an issue of privilege? Have I become desensitized to Black struggle, to Black death, to Black illness, to Black disability? Really interrogate where privilege is and also leverage your privilege. Leverage your privilege for the most marginalized. Do you have generational wealth? Do you have a home? Right? On your birthday and holidays, do you receive funds? Is that an opportune time to give to the people who are in need the most? And I think always like fat, dark-skinned femmes to the front. When I post mutual aid flyers, I often include a picture of myself. And I'm definitely aware of like being light-skinned and having a softer curl pattern and all of these things that are more adjacent to whiteness become assets when you post a picture of yourself. Yes, a picture helps, individuals to get to know you, to see your story more, to see who you are. At the same time, I'm aware I'm going to put on some lip gloss if I'm taking a selfie for mutual aid. I'm not going to wear my bonnet. And, there are these questions of respectability politics. There's social media and what gets you noticed. But I would say that I am hyper aware of my blackness and my features and my fatness, and other marginalizations when I'm taking pictures for mutual aid.
Yeah. Ty, thank you for everything you just shared. I have a lot of thoughts around this. Like, I think about like as a practice, like what would it be like if people were like, I'm gonna deliberately unpack when I'm looking at a mutual aid, am I giving it to the pretty person? Am I giving it to the ugly person? And maybe like let me choose the person who's uglified first, right? Knowing that, and like knowing everything that Ty just spoke to. Um, and then there's thinking about other stuff. Like there's so many Palestinians in Gaza who have been like, yo, we're on year two and we are so sick of having to like pimp out our stories and our grief and our pictures of our dead babies to get cash. And y'all really still don't care. Right? And that's part of it. And like obviously there's phenotype differences within Palestine, within Gaza. But then a lot of people pointed out, wow, so you want to know what really doesn't get traction? Like fundraisers for Congo, Sudan, right? Like dark-skinned, Black, continental African places that are experiencing genocide right now. There are literally pools of blood you can see from space in Sudan right now, right? And it's a real, I mean, I don't even have words where it's just like, what do you even say? What do you even say? It's like, it's in the pictures and nobody cares, right? Like, it's one of a million examples of Black, dark-skinned life being devalued. Like, nobody cares, right? People care, but a lot of people don't care. Um, and I'm thinking about, and shoot, I challenged myself to find this. I was seeing the other day on Instagram, there's a new Gazan mutual aid that's I think called like Liberatory Mutual Aid or something like that. But they were like, we're no longer, we're just collecting money and we are not forcing people to post pictures of themselves because everyone is being dehumanized by it. And actually, it's so clear that some people are getting more than other people, and it has to do with color, like respectability, like all kinds of things, like the palatability, how well someone speaks English. And sorry, I'll slow down. I'm a fast talker, as every access worker knows. Um, so I think about that, and I just think about like, like also in 2020 where a lot of people started using the term mutual aid for the first time. And, like some people think Dean Spade invented it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, he did not. No disrespect to Dean Spade, but a white man did not invent this term. And there were a lot of like, middle to upper middle class people who were on good unemployment who were like, oh, I want to bake bread for people. And then that shit went away. I just want to talk about that as a way that prettification plays out within mutual aids. And I started saying this because I feel like a lot of people, there's a lot of rhetoric then about like care is beautiful. And like, when we have care, we have everything we need. And I was like, yeah, and also care is hard. It's really hard. And there are people in my life, like in my communities, people who have been friends and lovers of mine who are really not that easy to hang out with, right? Like, and I just, this is not a new thing. Disabled people for years have been talking about we have to make ourselves cute to get a crumb, right? And then when people are like actually in a bad fucking mood, right? Or really cranky or really angry, and then you add like fatness, blackness, darkness, like all of this transness, etc., being mad in certain ways to that, the money does not flow, right? So, I mean, one thing. I feel like a lot of people have looked at some things I've written and being like, oh, you talk about collective care. And I'm like, yeah. And something I've tried to lift up is like, a lot of times people have no community and they have no community because they are uglified and they're isolated, right? And, community care should not be used to set up a caste system where popular disabled people get to have friends and get to have care. And people who are like, I'm heartbroken, devastated, angry, and like black, dark skinned, fat, etc., don't get shit, right? And the way this plays out in practice, like it's complicated and it's not. It's not complicated because people who are marginalized should get support. But I'm just thinking about like I have an ex who's passed on now, who to be honest could be a real asshole and who also was very isolated and then had some acquired disabilities on top of already being disabled and really needed like money for the rest of their life. And I would still send them $20 even though we weren't speaking because I was just like, like you need it and you're not popular. And you're not popular partly because you've been a dick sometimes, to be honest. Like not abusive, but like not that easy to be around, in ways that were related to their disability and the shit they were surviving, but also their personality. And I was like, you still deserve to not be like starving, right? Like you deserve to have what you need. And that can be complicated for people to interrogate, like, do I give to just people I like, or do I give to people I don't like? I'm not talking about supporting someone who's harmed you, been violent, like that's different, but just like the likability thing. And like, even though like I have friendship and social reach and light skin and a lot of fucking privileges on my side, I know I have like lost relationships by being too weird and too neurodivergent. And I've also lived with like, when do I get too weird in the face to be able to, or too old, right? Which is another real way to lose traction to get support. Like, I have known disabled people who were really well known 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, who are older and weirder and honestly more heartbroken. And they are not raking in the dollars. So also when people say support your elders, sometimes your elders are not that fun to be around because they've lived through a lot of shit. So that's part of it too. And yeah, I think that's everything. Sorry if I went on for too long.
I think one of the threads that really ties what Ty and Leah said is this idea that uglification exists, and also when people who are disabled ask for help, then they become like the ugly ones in society because of the need. Um, I've definitely seen this happen in my community. I think my first diagnosis was I was probably a teenager. But it wasn't until I started using a wheelchair that my friends knew that I was disabled, but it wasn't until I started using a wheelchair in a cane full time that I really understood how I had become the friend that was hard to be around because you would have to think about, oh, does the chair have a back? Can I get through the door? I won't be able to get a ride, so people will have to like pay for a larger ride share. I began to kind of like realize how the people who were okay with one of my invisible disabilities were not okay with my ambulatory disabilities, and my the relationship to the care that I needed kind of like decreased, and I got very upset. And it became this idea of you're mad, and I'm like, no, I'm not mad. I'm not overdoing this. You're the one who has decided that I am no longer worthy of care, or mutual aid, or my needs somehow are lessened. And I see this often, like with elders, when one of the things that happens often with like prison abolition, and prison abolition spaces is that a lot of people who have been inside, if they are ever liberated, they are angry. They have a lot of mental health issues. And then we want to be abolitionists, but we don't want to be there when the mental health crisis happens. What is the point of abolition existing if we don't want to support the person after they're liberated? So that's kind of one of the moments where we like the idea, but we don't like the labor that the idea merits. Um, which is hard to say, but something we all have to always evaluate. If I say I'm going to show up, am I willing to put in the labor? Um, and if you can't for that moment, you have to be able to admit it not only to yourself, but to the people you said that you would be able to show up to. With this, I am thinking that maybe we can take a small break for the panelists. So this will be a brief 5-minute break, and then we will come back with two more questions. Welcome back to those of you who are now joining us live and in the archive. Um, we're doing well, really great on time, as our chat says. So thank you, everybody. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is self-preservation. To live, all of us, as disabled people, we must engage in mechanisms of self-preservation against a state that is trying to kill us. Can you each talk about what self-preservation looks like for you? Any challenges you've encountered, and any demands that you have from your community so that you are able to live with more ease. Leah, would you like to begin?
Sure. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is I was having a conversation with a friend and a comrade the other day, and she just was like, she was sharing some stuff about her own experiences of burnout, and she said, we're not in these movements or struggles to get killed by them, and she was specifically talking about some of her own positionality as a Black neurodivergent femme person, and I was like, right. And that's just really real. And the reality is that like our movements and communities, like in my experience, like those places both support us and can kill us. Like whether it's like overt violence or, just expecting that you be a care factory or an experience factory or you get it right factory. Um, so I think I just want to start by naming that and that we all are imperfect, messy human beings trying to save the world and each other together, and we're going to mess up, but also being able to be like, I think specifically when it comes to mutual aid, I think that, we're like the fires are constant, the emergencies are constant. So everybody's level can get turned up to 28 because that's just where it is. But being like, we still have to be kind to each other. We still have to hear it and respect it. When somebody's like, I want to be there and I don't got it right now. Like, or like, I have this much to give and I wish there was more, but I'm gonna give you what I have. Right? Um, I think that feels part of it. I think like for me, a really important disabled organizing practice is like never being the one person who can do it, which is easier said than done, but like having backups, like not where if I get sick, it doesn't mean like the whole thing's over because there's somebody else who can also do it, which sounds simple, but it's not. It's so easy to be like, oh, especially as disabled people, we are trained to think that we don't know how to do anything and that we're incompetent. Like literally, that's a label that's given to us, right? I mean, I just got out of one of the, one of my main groups that I organize with, and we were just having like our regular Thursday meeting, and somebody who normally facilitates wasn't there because they were sick, and I could feel us being like, "Oh shit, do I know how to facilitate a meeting?" And like then, of course, we all did it, like to the degree that we could, right? So that's one part of it, and then the other major thing I want to say is that something that's really important for me in self-preservation as somebody like just personally as someone who has lost a lot of people to death in the last 5 years and period, and I know there's many of us who continually are losing people, during since the pandemic started, but also before, right? Because Black death is never ending, brown death, immigrant death, disabled death. Um, Speaking myself, I lost two people who were mentors to me this year, as well as comrades, and they were barely older than me, right? I'm 50 and people are like, "Oh, you're the old one." And I'm like, and there's the personal level of losing people and then the movement level of like, fuck, like what are we gonna do now? And I lost a lot of other people this year who are much less well known, So for me, long story short, um, it's been really important for me to not feel like I just have to push through and not feel it. I've really gotten protective around my own grief where I'm like, you know what? I'm really fucked up right now. And you're going to hear from me when you hear from me. Because my grief isn't a side note to the struggle. Like, I get to cry, I get to be off camera, I get to fall apart, I get to just send a million voice memos back and forth to like everyone else who's hurting. Um, you don't just have to be this soldier with no feelings who keeps toiling on. And like sometimes if that's the mode you're in, like I'm in that mode too, that's fine. But I just want people to know like you're not a failure if you're grieving and you're not letting down the movement if you have feelings, right? And for me, I hate I hate the fact that it's just going to be like this. Like we're going to keep losing people. Like I fucking hate it. And the things that help are everything from like being alone and just like letting myself not be observed and where I can just really fall apart, which is something that for my neurodivergence I really need. And also just being able to be with others who are sharing similar griefs in whatever way, because like that does help, including Zoom, including voice memos, all of that. And I guess something I think a lot about is, and I'll just wrap by saying this, is that I've had people who I really respect and love be like, really remind us that like we come from ancestors that survived horrible things and also ancestors who didn't, right? And that we can draw on those as examples. And that is really real. And I think sometimes the danger of it is we can start painting a picture in our head of like, oh, our ancestors are these perfect, heroic beings. And my thing is like, I'm looking at a photo of my Sri Lankan grandmother right now, and that woman survived like so much, like sexual assault, multiple times being married off to a first cousin, like living on an island that got invaded during World War II, losing her father, her first child, like all of this stuff. Living as someone who's politically radical in immense repression after the war was over. And the thing is, she gives me strengths, but also like those experiences messed her up. Like she's a trauma survivor who was like not always great to my dad because of that, who then was not great to me. So for me, it's both learning from like, yes, our ancestors survived stuff and we can be like, how did you do it? And partly I'm trying to lean into, with no judgment of my grandmother, also being like, death and trauma and loss will also really fuck you up. So I have to keep attending to myself and being like, all right, what kind of person do I want to keep being? Or else I'm gonna start drinking like the whole rest of my family, or I'm gonna act in ways that I don't want to, or I'm gonna lose myself. So that part, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Ty.
For me, I think after raising mutual aid for several years, I've realized some things that just don't work. For example, letting especially white people, people more privileged than I am, and really just bottom line anyone raise funds in my name because a couple years ago somebody was raising funds in my name and stole like hundreds of dollars from me. And it was another disabled person with a large following. I've spoken about it. They still have followers. They still have people giving them money. And in this situation, they actually asked to use my PayPal to receive funds because they said there was an issue with theirs. And then I saw the money that people were sending them. And they were getting such large amounts of money. But when they were raising funds for me on Mutual Aid Mondays, they were giving like $50, $100. So I got to see firsthand that privilege when you have that whiteness and when you post memes and you're entertaining as a white disabled person, all the help that you can receive very quickly. So that's one form of self-preservation. If somebody is doing a raffle for me, for example, the funds need to be sent to me directly. We can ask participants to take screenshots and send them in to the raffle leader, but nobody's going to be accepting funds in my name. So that's definitely one boundary I have. Asking for more help, asking for people to lead raffles, for example, or to lead mutual aid efforts on my behalf because it's a lot of labor and I can't do it alone. I will be honest though, that even when I am recruiting help and I'm so thankful for the help I receive, I do have to train people on like how to run a raffle. I have to approve posts. I have to approve my payment information, even though it's posted, several times a week. It's the same every time, but I'm having to approve. There's this level of like facilitation and leadership that's still required. So it's not labor free. It's a different kind of labor. But again, I'm very thankful for the generosity of people helping me. Um, we often say in mutual aid organizing that it's Black people sending the same $5 to other Black people because we're so used to sending our last because we know what it's like to be ignored. We know what it's like to be low income, to grow up poor. We know what it's like to be uglified. And so I definitely do find that I am doing that. And it's hard to think about self-preservation when you know somebody's suffering. I will eat a little less, you know, a given week if I know that I need to send 15, 20, $50 to somebody else who's going to go without medication, go without a medical appointment, things like that. I mean, I do wish that I had the privilege of embodying the disability justice principle of sustainability, because raising mutual aid to survive as a severely disabled Black femme who's also trans and queer, there are no days off. I do this every single day of my life. Um, I can't afford to take a day off. And the sad part is, I do this every single day of my life. And oftentimes, I still don't meet my goals. I'm shocked to see that there are people who, once their account is getting low, make like on average one mutual aid post a month. I have to post twice a week, a new flyer, a new post for my notes app, a new selfie, twice a week, and still not meet my goals. And so when there are, racists on GoFundMe raising hundreds of thousands of dollars overnight, you kind of wonder how that happens. And so this is a point that I brought up, that I've brought up before and cannot be brought up enough. Sometimes we don't have the resources, sometimes we're hurting, and also the resources are out there. There are white people with a ton of privilege. There are non-Black people with a ton of privilege. There are people with generational wealth. As I mentioned, there's people who get tons of money for Christmas, for their birthday. There are many people who choose not to participate in mutual aid. And I understand in a capitalist society, there's wealth hoarding, and we don't get to see as many examples as, of kindness, of generosity, of mutual aid. But that doesn't mean that we can sit back and just be comfortable. This is community care for survival. As Leah said, care work is not easy. It's hard. It takes sacrifice. You can do this sustainably as somebody with privilege, but you've got to do it. You've got to make a choice to do this weekly, monthly, daily, to get invested, to leverage your privilege, to leverage your whiteness, right? Are you severely disabled, or are you marginally, right, disabled? Are you looking at your privileges and looking at what you can give? Are you using your own sustainable practices as an excuse to keep comfortable? Are you gifting more marginalized people with sustainability, with a break, with a holiday, with a blessing? You've got to do the work. So when people give to me abundantly, one day when I have the privilege of really receiving abundantly from individuals raising mutual aid daily, then I can worry about self-preservation. Right now, I'm embodying the hoodoo principle of making a way out of no way, because I'm not going to die trying to get a meal. I do this every day so I can survive, and that's what we do as Black people. We survive unimaginable conditions. So I won't give up, and I appreciate the help I receive. And I implore people to offer more help to further marginalize Black people, but I'm also going to make a way out of no way, because if I don't, I won't make it.
Ty, you bring something up that's really powerful, and it's this idea of sustainability for whom, under what power dynamic, under what, matrix of domination. I think that in social justice spaces or in disability justice spaces, racial justice spaces, gender justice spaces, we like language. And it's just like the language can only go so far. And Leah, you said our communities can support and kill us. And that is very true. When I think about self-preservation, I'm also thinking about the the ways that we ask more, even from our own communities who are already disenfranchised. Because Ty, when you're speaking, I'm also hearing you speak to the Black middle class, I'm hearing you speak to other folk in your community, not just people at large. One of the things for me for self-preservation is I I used to think that I had to give everybody my diagnoses. I had friends who I would every time I went to see my neurologist or the complex diagnosis clinic, I would send them all my notes. And I was like, wait, I don't even talk to some of these people, but I felt a need to send it so that they could continue to care for me or to offer to drive me to the hospital or to my infusions. Because if I didn't send them this note from my doctor, then they wouldn't believe me. So part of me, self-preservation has been like, okay, I'm gonna let you show up if you're gonna show up. I'm not gonna give you reasons. I'm gonna let you know this is what's happening. If you show up, you show up, and if you don't, that is really sad. I'm angry. Um, but I have to like live with more dignity. And ever since I stopped doing that, people stop talking to me, but I feel more dignity and I feel my own value even more. Because for the people who I matter to, they don't need a diagnosis. They don't need every day to day of my medical visits. Um, One other thing that I want to like uplift of how um, I've seen other people fight for their self-preservation is when I was undocumented, if I got certain prescriptions, I couldn't actually get them even if I had insurance because they need to swipe your ID. So a lot of undocumented people who don't have IDs don't have access to prescriptions. So it's like you have to start like picking up people's prescriptions so that you can swipe your own ID because they'll never be able to get their prescription, even with insurance. And I've seen other people like practice that self-preservation. Um, when I grew up, there was nothing. When I was like living in New England, there was no undocumented licenses. And I remember being in college and a friend teaching me how to drive, knowing that I could not get a license. And that was a way of like self-preservation. We have to take risks. Um, Disabled people need to live, and this country often makes our livelihood illegal by capping off how much we can get in aid, by capping off insurance, by not allowing us resources. So I think when we're thinking about self-preservation, we also have to ask our communities, are you willing to engage in illegal activity and take risks on behalf of something grander than yourself? Um, and with this, Leah, you've already kind of t touched on this final question a little bit. Um, And give me one second. So the last 5 years have been a nightmare, to say the least. As we each fight to stay alive, we are also grieving loss. Um, this is the loss of community members due to medical malpractice, COVID, HIV and AIDS, the ongoing genocide against trans people, and poor people of color inside of the United States, while also witnessing genocides in places like Sudan and occupied Palestine. Um, how do you process loss? And what do you need from others in order to be able to process that loss in a way that doesn't feel all-consuming? Ty, would you like to start?
Yeah, I will say I'm not the best at processing loss, but I try to do it relationally. I think that check-ins can be just as mutual aid is care work. Check-ins are care work, and I don't mean how are you? I'm fine. I mean deeply sitting with people that are grieving, deeply sitting with people that are dealing with issues that you can't necessarily fix. And doing that with patience and kindness and empathy and openness and a commitment to your friendship or your relationship as members of the same community or what have you. Um, I think, to borrow language from 12 Step, I really do try to do the next right thing. And I do have to take time to ask myself what that is. When Alice Wong died, I didn't know what that was. Um, I had people checking in on me because I met her as an Emerge 2025 fellow. And I mean, I found that that was just like crying in I was bedbound for the weekend and eating snacks, um, and not having the spoon to make meals. So, going back to the concept of sustainability as a disability justice practice, it does take time. We do have to honor the time that it takes to grieve, and the time that it takes to heal, if healing is indeed possible.
Alan, did you want me to speak to that? Or I felt like I could speak a little. I feel like I already did a little bit. Yeah, I'm still it's just a month. It's just a month. It's gonna be a month tomorrow that Alice has passed. And yeah, time, people, water, food, crying, orgasm, being a mess. I feel like some people were like, "Whoa, you and Jane wrote that memorial real quick," and I was like, "Yeah, we're autistic. We were just like, just like we just like that's one way we process it." And like memory, there's the Black Southern term memory worker is such a beautiful, beautiful, powerful lineage of work, and I think a lot of our communities have different traditions where it's like, what is remembered lives, right? Like, and I think one of my lines I say a lot is like when you're disabled, they want to try and kill you while you're alive and then pretend you never existed after you died. So I think there's really something specific about resisting that erasure by remembering our dead, not just as these sanitized kind of like simple heroes, but like, I really like talking about like Stacey was a hoe, like Stacey Park Melvin was not just a cute little Korean organizer. Like Stacey was a beautiful, sexual, complicated human being. She was a tourist. That was my bourbon drinking buddy. We loved talking shit while we were like facilitating a workshop in the chat, being like, these people, oh my God. And she wasn't perfect. And like none of our dead who've died were perfect or should have to be perfect to deserve our grief or our memory. I don't want to be remembered just as this like Xerox of who I am when I die. I want to remember for all of it, right? Like so the ways of memory are really important. I think that's Stacey has that line, my ancestors and I are learning and loving together. That's easier said than done. But like that's part of it, of being like, yeah, of just like holding on to our humanity. Because like to insist that our disabled dead have to be perfect after they die is just one more continuation of like uglification, prettification. Like you can also only be loved if you're a good cripple who's perfect. Fuck that. Um, yeah, and I just think that like being able to be together as much as possible, and it's not easy. Like we are forced into isolation. Like some of us can't leave our houses, Like I have friends who have not been able to let anyone in their homes for going on 6 years now because they're immune suppressed, right? Like, because they're like, I can't die, right? But I'm just thinking about, the difference when I've been able to gather, like, have like an outdoor memorial or a COVID safer memorial, or just be with a friend, after a loss. Like, I mean, one of the things that happened, I had hip replacement surgery 5 weeks ago, and when Alice passed, I was on week 2, and I couldn't go down the stairs. Like, I'm not in an accessible apartment. For a couple weeks, and I just texted some of my friends being like, I'm sad, can you come over? And they did. And this is one thing too. I just want to say sometimes like there's not one way to do mutual weight and there's not one way to hold loss. And I think sometimes we get hit with a stick of like, you've got to do it this way. I used to be like especially when I was living on the West Coast, like there was a real kind of like practice of like we're gonna like emote at each other and like blah 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 blah. And like I need that sometimes, but like my friends came over, we just smoked weed and watched Smiling Friends because they knew that there was nothing they could say that could make it better, but they could be there on the couch with me, and that helped. So it doesn't have to be verbal, you know? That's what I got.
Thank you. And just briefly to add, a lot of like the ways that people process loss is very cultural and specific. And I think that one of the things that would like at least my friends to do is to ask me about my own culture and what our practices of mourning are because they're very different than in the US. Um, like I grew up in a culture where you go and you celebrate someone's death for like 10 years in a row. And you talk about them and you do all of these things with their family. And it's very different than here. But also, I think that for me, processing loss has been also learning when I have to not assume like leadership positions. I have been the worst leader when I am in grief. And I realize that I cannot take on responsibilities when I am in deep grief because I will make everyone's work harder. I have to actually be like, no, I can't. And it sucks. You were depending on me, and at this moment, I might make things worse. Um, but we have a couple of audience questions that I want us to get to. So we have about nine of them. Okay, I like skimmed through them quickly. There's one that I think is really practical and useful. One of the questions is how do we deal with being in communities where there is limited capacity and burnout? Often I find that people willing to do mutual aid work are the people willing to ignore their own needs and boundaries to make the work happen. How can we encourage care and safety, not ignoring needs and limits?
Oh, should I go ahead? Um, I mean, I'm going to be real. I'm just going to keep it real. To a certain extent, burnout is a privilege. You think I'm not burned out? I just said I can't stop doing this daily. I'm just kind of like my ancestors were slaves. Do you think the term burnt out exists then? You know, um, I understand that there's limitations and I understand that people only have so much capacity. And every single day of my life as a severely disabled person, I work on capacity building. I wouldn't have been able to do my fellowship going from being hospitalized for psychosis to where I am now if I didn't build capacity, right? As disabled people, we are so used to adapting and finding a way to do things that seem impossible. So why do you apply that to other aspects of your life, but you don't apply that to helping people more marginalized than you? Because that seems like an issue of perspective. If we understand mutual aid as a key aspect of resisting capitalism and colonialism and fascism, and it's a way that we survive these systems together because these systems are meant to kill us, to burn us out, for real burnout, right? To kill us in the process, then we understand that this is not something that we can do casually. We understand that this is a commitment to social justice because we're oppressed, because we're marginalized, because as disabled people, we know good and well how hard it is to exist on the margins of society. So I definitely understand that people are at capacity. It's groceries are more expensive than ever. We're trying to resist fascism. There's multiple genocides going on. And I'm just wondering, how much time do you spend figuring out what you can do rather than focusing on what you can't do? I believe that we are so much more capable than we know, and that in community, together, towards liberation, there is nothing that we can't do.
Ty, I want to kind of name three things that you kind of put on the table. Mutual aid as casual, mutual aid as commitment, and mutual aid as a non-negotiable. One of the things when we're experiencing people who are doing mutual aid work who we consider are already burnt out, it's we have to be like, oh, because for them it's a non-negotiable. And that's when others need to come in and not wait for the person to say, oh, I'm burnt out. Because oftentimes, if it's a non-negotiable for your life, you don't get to say, I'm burnt out. So we have to be uh, better relatives in noticing when others need something before it's hospitalization.
Is it cool if I add some stuff? Yeah, I would just say like, I mean, right, it's the both and. It's like I was at level 10 pain for the last 3 years, and I'm not saying to be like, you can do it too. I'm like, it sucks. And I have so much coping skills from it. Like we all do. Like we're all at different levels of level 10 pain, whether it's mental, physical, social, psychological, all the time. And, giving up's not really an option, right? And having said that, like, it doesn't mean that like people don't go into crisis or fall apart. So just, I don't know, just not to repeat what you both have already said, but it just makes me think about like, yeah, like part of the capacity building for me is like, how do we like pass the baton back and forth? Like, if somebody's like, yo, I need a day off, it's like, great, like, how about I take up some of the burden for you? Or also just practices that like seem like little or nothing, but it's like, can we have water at the meetings? Can we like, just sit on a park bench and talk shit and laugh and do shit that is restorative? Like what are the free or low cost or like 5-minute things that we do that are shit that we already do that make us feel good, that can like pour some water back into our well, because there's not really a vacation from this, like this is like and I just feel like there's like a million examples I can think of people who are in dire circumstances. Like, I hate the word resilience and I don't even want to use it because I just think it's gotten so co-opted and bullshit but just like, what are the ways we're already surviving being in these unsurvivable circumstances, right? That often I think sometimes, like the way, I'm not saying the person who posed the question means it this way necessarily, but there's a corporate idea of fixing burnout that's like go on a yoga vacation, right? As opposed to like, no, I can just like hang out with my friend's kid when she's like, I'm really about to lose it and be like, look, let me just take him for like, you go to the bathroom, like, I'll just be here. Or like things that there aren't even words for, like, I will, like, you can come over to my house and it's a mess because, it is. And you're not going to make me feel weird about it, and that's normal. And we're just going to shoot the shit and like hang out and work together and like have some fucking tea while we're doing it. Like that stuff, right? Like that stuff. Um, understand like an acceptance that people can like don't have to be in a good mood or not messy to be doing mutual aid or organizing, right? That like you can do it tired, you can do it sad, you can do it depressed. And that like I'm thinking about like one thing a beloved friend said years ago when the term pleasure activism was getting popularized, where she was like, I'm not saying I hate this, but some things don't feel pleasant. Sometimes you just have to take out the garbage and it is not an orgasm. And I'm like, that part, and like I'm not shitting on pleasure activism. Like I like pleasure, I'm a Taurus, but sometimes you just do stuff and sometimes the doing stuff, I'm like, great, my house doesn't smell because the garbage is outside. That's great. Like it can be like that. Like I think sometimes when there's an expectation of organizing always has to feel good. I think that's like just not realistic and it's a setup for failure, right? And that, there's that, what's that line? Solidarity is the kindness, the tenderness of people in the world. Like that's what can be an anti-burnout thing for me, not some mythic vacation that I'm not necessarily going to get or be able to afford or access, you know?
Right. And also this idea that like in this capitalist sense, that burnout is something a vacation can fix.
Right.
Right. Whereas the the high that we get from engaging meaningfully in intentional communities can help sustain us,
Hmm.
right? Um, like Leah said, sometimes just being around people who you love and who love you is
Yeah.
extremely restorative. I go to disability justice coffee hours with the Uprise Collective, and sometimes it's just disabled people lamenting about anything.
Usually.
Yeah, usually.
Yep.
And that gives me hope. That lets me express myself just complaining and being heard by people who are just like me. And that gives me the strength to keep going. This idea that you're going to cure burnout in some kind of magical way. Maybe you need a different approach and maybe
Hmm.
you need help or maybe you need to help other people. But I think that we work this out relationally. We work this out in community. And I'm not sure that burnout can be fixed in isolation.
Mhm. And
Ty,
I'm
I
just
absolutely
not on
agree.
I just want to say this is important to me. Like somebody who I really loved who survived really brutal torture as a kid and who had always been poor and was a really throwdown organizer and a very mad person. Um is no longer here. And something I think about a lot is some of the stuff he shared towards the end of his life, where he was like finally getting recognized as an organizer and getting like a little bit of grant money here and there, and like was still like poor, right? And he had felt like there was so much pressure on him, like even though he came into this as a poor, mad, multiracial organizer, to not be crazy in public. That like he'd be calling me from the ward, but being like, and then the funders like, where we haven't heard from him. Have you heard from him? And I'm like, oh my God. I just want to talk about that because I think specifically as disabled and mad organizers, that is a thing, especially as like the movement grows and sometimes there is money and resources where we have to be these palatable disabled people and we are not doing okay and we're forced to closet that to be seen as reliable. And I just want to say that like I really want to encourage us to be like we are killing ourselves if we do that. Like I'm not saying like, I mean, of course, sometimes you have to mask to survive. I don't share all of my stuff with everybody, but just that expectation that like, you have to be a crazy organizer who's not ever actually crazy, like that is murder. And like we have to keep building movements where we can still be who we are, right? Like we have to like, and if there's whether it's funders, whether it's whatever who's insisting that we just be, like Harvard educated super Crips who never are crazy or like shitting in a bag on ourselves or like just dealing with the stuff we deal with and like it's just what I'm trying to say, like we can't do that. We have to resist that. That's an anti-burnout approach. Okay, I don't even know if you'd call it burnout, but like that's something that will help us survive, right? I didn't get into DJ for us to be a bunch of sanitized ass fucking people who couldn't be as just as crazy as we are, right? Like I will, I don't know, I want to say this. I'm like, that makes me want to SI if like disability justice ends up being a place for just socially acceptable disabled people. No, absolutely not. Thank you for all
I
the applause emojis. And thanks for letting me know. I just really wanted to say that.
No, I'm really glad you did, because it ties back to one of the questions was talking about respectability politics, how and beauty politics, how we invoke it. But Ty, I want to like really uplift what you said about this being part of relationality. We need communities. Under a capitalist system, it's very easy for us to dispose of one another because we can just say, "Oh, not them," or "I'm mad at them because of X," and then never engage again. And that's what capitalism needs, especially amongst disabled communities, because we're all fighting for resources, and it's easy for us to uglify one another as we chase the resource that we have been denied, not only by the medical industrial complex or the state, but maybe our own families or friends, chosen families. Um, and another one last thing before we kind of begin to put closure, there is an extreme loneliness that disabled people who are in rural areas face, who don't have access to, like larger hospitals or clinics that have specialists. So when we're thinking about sustainability and burnout, I think oftentimes we forget about how geography plays a significant relationship to mutual aid and care.
Mhm.
If you ain't in a place that's near a city, your access to care and mutual aid is significantly cut off. And if you're hyper rural, you're more susceptible to domestic violence by, for example, a caretaker or a partner or a parent. So the risks get even higher, and asking for help then becomes even more. Dangerous, and asking for help should never be dangerous, but that is the reality that people who live with either long-term or short-term disabilities experience.
Yeah, I would just add that having to move back to the suburbs in New York where I grew up, after being homeless um, has meant, yeah, access to less resources as compared to living in New York City and living in Philly. Philly was amazing for Black trans mutual aid, and I received so much help. We talk about sharing medication. People in Philly, they will really share their meds with you. They're still down, and I really feel like I miss that close-knit community in Philly particularly, and the Black folk there. And yeah, I am more isolated. And on the one hand, I'm housing secure because I live in supportive housing for people with bipolar and schizophrenia. And on the other hand, I'm further away from help, you know? But yeah, I think that like we really do have to think about geography. And I think that in the relationships we build, we can be intentional about reaching out to people who are more isolated, whether that be because of their disability, because of geography, because of uglified identities or qualities. I think that it's so important to find communities that we believe in and to find connections that propel us forward where we can be accountable to each other and really engage in the depth of care work.
This is Mika speaking. Well, thank you so much. As we're wrapping up this panel, I just have one more question for each of you. And you have about 1 to 2 more minutes for final thoughts. Just anything, any last words you want to share, but also importantly, how can we uplift and support your mutual aid campaigns? So, Ty, I'll turn it back over to you. And please drop the links in the chat too.
As I've said, I raise mutual aid daily to survive. I'm severely disabled, unable to have really full-time or part-time employment. I'll be doing this every day. So there's never a wrong time to send me funds, to send my link out to other people, and yeah, to ask your communities, like, look at this severely Black disabled person who's so cute and smart and awesome. How about we help them survive? You know? Thank you.
Thanks, Ty. Leah,
Yeah, I just want to, I mean, I can name Crips for Eastern Gaza. We have a Cheft fundraiser that's still up. And, I mean, one thing that I want to name is that a lot of people in Gaza have named that since the supposed ceasefire, which is a lie, like Israel continues to kill, bombard, and starve and mutilate Gazans every day. There's been a huge, every single mutual aid in Gaza has seen a huge drop off in funds, like every single fundraiser, and the need is still there. Like it's not like everything's fixed. So I would say, like, yes, please keep boosting. Reach out to us at cripsforeastamsreza@gmail if you want to volunteer. There's a lot of ways to patch in. Like $5, $1 makes a huge difference. And we work with Chef because they're in Australia and they don't skim funds, which is really nice. And they've been supportive of anti-Zionist fundraisers. But there's also like a million individual fundraisers. I'm kicking myself that I'm like cannot think of the name of uh the mutual aid crowd fund that I mentioned before that was like we don't put up people's pictures. But Gaza Funds is one that you can check out. And also just like I don't know, I just want to name like there's wherever you are, there's mutual aids. So just look around, like donate to somebody that you don't know. You know what I mean? And like make it consistent if you can. Try and pool it. Like, I've seen a lot of people be like, I've got five on it. Can you also get five on it? Like stuff like that. There's probably something I'm forgetting that's really important, but like, yeah, I think that's just one that I'll say for right now.
and finally, our lovely moderator and panelist, Alan.
I think that towards the end of today's panel, both Ty and Leah kind of like we're talking about the mundane actions that we can engage that often people forget about. For example, there was about 15 months where a close friend of mine would have to take out my trash, come to my apartment, take out just to take out my trash because I couldn't do it. But like you have to start getting yourself in the mindset of like, what are tangible things that I can do that I disregarded on my day-to-day life because I can just do them. And you need to start offering them as often as possible. And you need to get to know your neighbors. Like I've randomly have had to ask neighbors to help me pick up a broken dish. I've had to knock on doors and be like, can you pick this up for me? Because if not, I'm harming myself. I am gonna drop the Venmo and PayPal of Chella Coleman, who like Ty, I see regularly asking for mutual aid. Chella has been organizing in Skid Row in Los Angeles for a large part of her life, Black, fat, trans woman who really deserves more care and mutual aid. And I've been in community with Chella for about 10 years. And it just angers me so much every time Chella asks for help, the little bit that I ever see on any of the GoFundMe's. So dropping in their information.
This is Nika. Just a huge thank you to all of you for such a powerful, beautiful panel discussion. I saw so many emojis and messages of support throughout. And I really hope that we all internalize the messages from this panel. And if you're able to, please join me in contributing to the links where Ty, Leah, and Alan just provided. To continue this conversation, please check out the DCC Discord. Um, and we have a couple more events coming up to end this year, including if you're local, a holiday tea party and cookie swap, and virtually our final cafe trip of the year next Friday. So we're dropping the link to our link tree in the chat. That's dcc.page/link. This is where you can find out more and sign up for our newsletter and follow us. Today's program was presented to you by the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center, led by Elsie and Lily Cox, Haven of Hope, and all made possible thanks to support from the City of San Francisco's Human Service Agency's Department of Disability and Aging Services. Thank you again to our wonderful moderator and panelists. Thank you to our fabulous access team today. And thank you all for being with us for this discussion. We'll see you all next time. Have a wonderful night.